Let's talk about B-roll, not BROLL. B-roll is the secondary footage in any interview project. A-roll then is the actual interview itself. So you have A-roll and you have B-roll. Now, the whole point of B-roll is to cover up all the cuts you've made in your interview. As of right now, you should have a timeline that's filled with footage that's just absolutely hacked apart. And if we didn't have stuff to cover those edits, we just have jump cuts all over the place. And that's not what we want. So B-roll covers our editing. But beyond making our interviews look seamless, B-roll also aids the story. There's a common notion called say dog, see dog, which means if I start talking about a dog, you should see a dog on screen. Wait, something fell off there. If I start talking about a dog, I should see a dog on screen. Ah, yes, much better. See how that makes sense. You're hearing me talk about a dog and you're seeing a dog on screen. There's nothing worse than having someone talk about something and then having mismatched B-roll to something that doesn't really fit. This is especially true for the tone in their face. If in the interview they're talking about something that's really hard and tragic, but there's B-roll of them smiling and hanging out with friends, that's an emotional mismatch. We have to be able to choose and film B-roll that goes with what they're saying. And this is also a real art form because as you're interviewing your subject, you should be listening to the types of B-roll you may need to get after you're done filming them. Filming B-roll is one of my favorite parts of a documentary or interview experience because you get to really now express your creativity through the types of shots that you get. And usually it's a great chance for you to take your interview subject out into the world and film them doing various things. It can add a lot of depth to the story. The challenge then is going to be to choose the right footage to go over our interview. So as Anthony's talking about something, we want to look through the B-roll that I've given you to find that perfect shot that matches the emotional tone of what he's talking about. This is the challenge, but it's a fun challenge. Now, lastly, I want to talk about getting enough B-roll. There is nothing worse than getting back from a shoot, everything's been filmed, and as you're editing, you realize, oh no, I don't have enough B-roll. It's the worst because now you have all these cuts that you don't have footage to cover, and you have to start to kind of almost reuse things, and it's never good. So even though I've given you B-roll for this exercise, I want you to consider what I've talked about as you guys start to film B-roll for your own projects in the future. Make sure you're filming B-roll that matches the tone of what they're talking about in the interview itself. And make sure you film plenty of B-roll to cover the entirety of your edit. So with that, go ahead and download the B-roll that I've given you and let's start editing inside of Premiere. Right above this tutorial, I've provided you a zip folder to download all the B-roll that we've collected for this project. Go ahead and download that now and unzip it. Then we need to make some room in our project panel for our B-roll. Now our media bin is currently divided into 3 sub-bins. Well, these 3 sub-bins compose the interview portion of this project. So we want to package these up into a new sub-bin called interview. So let's select our media bin and let's click on our new bin icon down here at the bottom of our project panel. And let's call this bin in all caps, interview. Once we make that new bin, we can take our existing bins for our G9, GH5, and H6 and drag them into our interview bin. Good. We can collapse the interview bin. Now select the media bin one more time and go ahead and make another new bin. Let's call this one B-roll. And this will be the bin that will import all of the B-roll clips that I've given you. So now we have a separate B-roll and interview bin in our project panel. Now let's go ahead and start to import some of the media that I've given you. If I come into my import window here, you can see that we have 4 separate folders here of different types of footage. Footage from an Ari Amira, footage from Anthony and his social media accounts, B-roll footage from the G9, and B-roll from the GH5. These are from the actual shoot day that we did. So we want to go ahead and import these one folder at a time. Go ahead and do this now. So once you've imported all the folders of your B-roll into your B-roll bin, it's time for us to start getting footage into our timeline. Now, before we start doing this, we generally do not need the audio from our B-roll. There are some instances where you do want to pull the audio from it, but in this case, most of our B-roll here is going to be slow motion. And we don't want to have the audio from slow motion clips. So we want to make sure that we have our audio patching turned off, meaning none of my A's should be selected in the left-hand column. These are my patches. It's okay to have your tracks selected, but we don't want to have our patches selected. That way, if I grab a B-roll clip and drag it into my timeline, notice how the audio doesn't come with it. This is what we want. As opposed to if I keep my patches turned on and I drag the same clip, notice how the audio drags in. And we run the risk of it overwriting some important audio that we need for our interview. So let's make sure that we keep our patches turned off in our timeline. Next, there are two ways we can approach this. The first is with subtractive editing, where we literally take all the footage that we have in terms of our B-roll, we throw it into a new sequence, and we start to lift up the parts that are good. The other is with 3-point editing, where we double-click in our source panel and select ins and outs for each of our clips. And because we have multiple clips from different cameras and different frame rates, I'm going to use 3-point editing for this exercise. So to reiterate, the goal of our B-roll is to do two things. One, to cover up the edit points and the gaps that we have in our timeline. The second is to achieve the say dog, see dog technique, which is to match what Anthony is saying to B-roll that matches in the emotional tone. So this requires us to listen to what Anthony's saying and then to comb through our B-roll for a shot that matches. For this exercise, I'm going to leave my intro alone, and we're just going to cover some of the other gaps in footage. The reason is we're going to use montage as beginnings and interludes for our project, and we'll get to that in the next tutorial. For now, I know we have a gap right here, where Anthony says, "Who am I?" in terms of not knowing who he was after he had gained all that weight after playing video games for so long that drove him to start dancing.
20 pounds, 30 pounds over my normal weight, and I'm just like, who am I?
And a nice music break there. So let's toggle down all of our B-roll clips here. And if you need to, you could bring up your whole panel to start to view these a bit better. Now, because our lists start to get pretty long here, this is where I would recommend viewing this in icon view. Icon view is going to be great for allowing us to preview the shot, not just the name. So I'm going to come to my media bin, my B-roll bin, and now when I double click, say, the GH5 bin, I can actually preview, even just by kind of hovering my mouse over these, what the B-roll contains. Let's do this first one with 3-point editing. I want to find a shot where Anthony is kind of forlorn. I think this shot here where it kind of blurs in and out. Let's double click Pana 5065.mov. Let's double click that into our source monitor. Good shots of his eyes, which are always very personal, but it's too close up. Let's double click the Pana 5064, the clip before it. It goes from out of focus to in focus. Let's do this one. Let's start this shot right as it's out of focus. I'm going to hit I on my keyboard to set my in. And let's move this right to where it starts to go out of focus again, right about here. And I'll set O for my out. Let's drag our playhead then to where we want this to start. Right here, where he starts to say, "Who am I?" Now let's make sure we're patching this correctly. Right now I have this patching to V1. That's not what I want. I want to patch this to V3. That way V3 can become our B-roll track. And I'm going to hit period on the keyboard to overwrite this space with my B-roll clip. Now we can see it covers that gap perfectly. Let's give it a watch.
20 pounds, 30 pounds over my normal weight, and I'm just like, who am I? My first experience.
It's kind of nice. Now I think I kind of want him to be looking up a bit sooner. So I'm going to drag this over a little bit, trim away some of the beginning slow motion part, and then trim the end right to where his next segment starts. Let's watch that one more time.
My normal weight, and I'm just like, who am I? My first experience of...
It's nice. Now it feels kind of by itself. As a general rule of thumb, we don't want to have singular B-roll shots hanging out by themselves. You should always have them at least in pairs. And so we have now kind of a matching tight shot here that will double click into our source panel and then find a good spot to bring it in. I like right about here where he starts to look up. So I'm going to mark my in when he's looking down and come right to the part where he's looking up a little bit and then mark my out point. And then I'm going to find that point in the B-roll when he starts to look up, right about there. And I'm going to overwrite this, hitting period on my keyboard, and let's check this out now.
And I'm just like, who am I? My first experience of dancing was at a high school pep rally.
Good, let's tighten that up a little bit. First of all, there's a beat here we could capitalize on. There's a snare beat right here. You can see that in the waveform. And so if we tighten this up and drag it over, that way the cut happens right on the snare. I'm going to go ahead and retime this too to where he's looking up just a little bit faster so it doesn't eat too much into the next segment. Let's play it back.
Over my normal weight, and I'm just like, who am I? My first experience of dancing.
Yeah, it feels really good. We capitalize on that beat, and now we move into the next segment. Now we have this cut here in his first segment, and we might be tempted to use B-roll to cover every single cut, but we don't have to, and there's a reason. We filmed this with 2 cameras, which means we can use this second angle as a way of hiding cuts as well. Check it out. I'm going to turn the eyeball back on for my second angle. I'm going to click on this first tight shot. I'm going to right click it and I'm going to unenable it by clicking enable. That effectively turns that off without turning the eyeball off for the entire track. So all I'm seeing now is what's beneath it, my wide. But notice here, this tight shot is still enabled. So when I play this,
a lot of video games and just gained a lot of weight. My computer was right next to the mirror, and there was this one night where
you can see what we did there. It looks now like it's a continuous statement because we're using both shots simultaneously. Now again, this shot here was filmed in 4K. So under my Effect Controls tab, this was scaled down to 50% in our earlier tutorials. If I want this to be much tighter, I could just scale this back up without losing any quality. We want to make sure that our eye lines are matched. So you can see here, his eyes are right here. Next frame, they jump over here. And so this is where we can use the position data to move our interview left and right. And because it's in 4K, we have a lot of travel room before it starts to show the footage underneath. So let's come and do this again. A little bit more to the left. And this position data is broken up in the x-axis, which is side to side, and the y-axis, which is up and down. A little bit more to the left. Yeah, it feels nice. Let's watch it one more time.
Games and just gained a lot of weight. My computer was right next to the mirror, and there was this one night where I was playing World of Warcraft. I looked at the mirror and I was probably like 20 pounds, 30 pounds over my normal weight, and I'm just like, who am I? My first experience of dancing.
And now, since we don't want to come back to the wide shot, I'm just going to unenable this. And so you can see what we're doing. We are using B-roll to cover our cuts and our gaps. But when we want to have a continuous shot of Anthony talking, we can cut back and forth between our wide and our tight. Between these things, we should be able to cover nearly every aspect of our interview, creating a seamless experience for our viewers.